Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for a very, very special episode of Talk with Tasha. I'm Natasha Harper-Madison, Austin City Council member, proudly representing District 1 on the Sunrise side of I-35. Tonight, you're in store for 2 full hours of discussion on a very important topic, reconciling racism. How did we get here? Where do we go from here? And I think most importantly, frankly, how do we heal? I have a small army of very interesting and astute guests who will help us explore the answers to these questions and more. 8 people in total will share this screen with me throughout the night. We'll be bringing them on in segments. And if all goes as planned, we'll have a roundtable discussion with most, if not all, of the group during the last section of the show. This is just a conversation between me and the guest, though, so nothing too stuffy, not question answer, and you can be a part of it too. So drop your questions in the comment section, and I'll do my level best to get them answered. So who do we have tonight? From the University of Texas, Associate Professor in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department, and the Director of the Center for Asian American Studies, we have Eric Tang. Hi there. And then also from UT's African and African Diaspora Studies Department, Christen Smith, a Black feminist anthropologist and social justice advocate. She'll help us explore the intersection of Blackness and feminism, along with Dada, local musician, artist, and half of the performing duo Riders Against the Storm, to talk about white allyship in this current outcry for racial justice. Director of Progressive Advocacy Group, Southern Crossroads, we have Evelyn Lynn. She'll be joined by Reese, a fascinating fellow who started the Rednecks for Black Lives movement in conjunction with Southern Crossroads. As Emlyn, and we also have Emlyn Lee, founder of Building Relationships, Awareness, Voices, and Engagement, or BRAVE Communities. And last, but certainly not least, we have the executive director of the New Philanthropist, an organization dedicated, and this is very important, y'all, dedicated to diversifying nonprofits. We have Paulina Artieda. Awesome. So as you can see, that's a lot of people, and I can't wait to jump right into talking with them. But first, we have a very special guest who took a few minutes out of his hectic schedule to be with us tonight. We'll go ahead and bring him out right now. My friend, my colleague, and City of Austin Mayor, Stephen Ira Adler. Hi there.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks for the invite. This is really nice, your setup here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We got some good people working on things behind the scenes. You know, I couldn't do it by myself. It's good to see you outside of a council meeting. We had a marathon week, huh?
Boy, I tell you, it was a long one, but a pretty exciting one too. Thanks for your leadership on so much of what we've done here the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely. And in all honesty, I followed the lead of you and some of, all of my other colleagues who've been doing this longer than I have, who, just really led the way and helped me recognize that, holding on tight and just sticking with it is how we get to, to the other side of challenges. So as you know, yesterday we passed the city budget for the next fiscal year. All the budget processes you've been a part of since 2015. How would you rate this one on a scale of 1 to 10?
I think this is where we really realized a lot of aspirations. I mean, we'd been kind of nipping around the edges. We did some really good things that pointed us in the right direction. It's a great council. I mean, for the last 5 years, it's probably been one of the most progressive councils in terms of churning out work. But we did nothing on the scale of what we just did. And that's because it was, I think, the perfect opportunity. It was the right council, but it was also the right time. The community stood up. Conversations all over the city, at kitchen tables and in the streets. So it was all of that. And then I think, Natasha, it was watching this pandemic, we've all been home and seeing the disparities that exist with the pandemic, I think really has reached a lot of people, that this was not the thing that was top of consciousness for them. And then obviously the killing of George Floyd and Mike Ramos here. All these things came together, I think, and provided just a real moment to make big things, transformational things happen. And it was having you on the council too, and you haven't been with us but a couple times.
I'm wondering wave at me if you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you disappeared for a second, but then you came back.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was saying this is only my second time, and it was something special. So, as they do, and generally speaking, I ignore it, but as they do, our police association, they tried to troll me this week. They played an old clip of me saying that I support a well-paid, well-trained police force that's respected by our community. The irony is that the fact is I still do. And I don't think you would disagree. Would you speak to that at all?
Well, it's so many people in this community right now are pointed in the same direction. And that's wonderful. The association, not. And that's a shame, because they could be such a constructive part of this. Their people's experiences with police are different, and communities of color have lived a very different experience over generations. There are also some great police officers, and what we need to do is to make sure that we celebrate the members of the force that are coming with the kinds of values and culture that fits with the larger community. It is not. It's not right that all police officers are judged by the conduct of some. We don't do that in other professions, but there are issues here. We see that with the number of people who've had the need for mental health interventions and end up getting killed. We see that in the reports that have been issued in the reviews. So I don't know. Natasha, you can't spend a lot of time getting caught up in what our association does. You have to stay focused on doing the good work with allies and the people in the community that are dedicated that way, and there are so many, and it's that group that's going to get this done.
That's another bit of good advice. I don't know if you remember giving me this advice. It was while I was still running. I was on the campaign trail. You told me to never read the comments. That was the first advice you ever gave me. So I appreciate that very much. And you're right. So let's talk about something considerably more important while I have a few more minutes with you.
Okay.
When it comes to reconciling race in Austin, I'm curious to know, how do you see your role in that?
Well, to assist, I think my role begins by listening, and I think that there are a lot of people in this community that need to start in this process by listening. It is real clear that the disparities that exist in our community didn't happen by accident; they happened by intentional design. Over generations, and it's important that people understand that, and then people also understand the real lived experience of the people and the communities that are here now. You and I have certain privileges that are associated with the position and the role that we have here on the city council. And I think it's important for us to try and make sure that tool is something that's available to the community to use. It's their tool. So the ability to be able to convene is a tool that I have in this role as mayor, When I ask for a meeting, usually people will come. The ability to be able to use the bully pulpit to be able to be heard and have others heard is another tool that comes with the office. That is something that I and you need to make available to the community more largely. I am really excited to be doing this work with you in that position, and I intend to follow your lead as we follow the lead of the community.
Yeah, and with emphasis on following the lead of the community, because they definitely help us to get closer to what it is that everybody's asking us for. So I really appreciate that. So I know that it's not mission accomplished now that the budget is over. I am curious though, what's next in your strategy book?
Well, we pointed in the right direction with this budget, and there were some things that were immediate action, and I'm excited to really scale up the permanent supportive housing, get people off the streets and into homes, the work to provide the additional shelters for people that are trying to get to a safe place from abuse. I'm excited to get the mental health responders out, to increase the capacity of EMS. Those things are going to happen right away. But a lot of the things that we said we want this to happen, and we gave the staff the instruction to figure out how to get it done. So I think you and I are going to have to, along with our colleagues, because it was unanimous and everybody's invested. I think we're going to have to stay on top of that process and make sure that it progresses. I'm going to be working here over the next few months on Project Connect, which I see as one element of trying to make our city a more just and more fair city, making sure that everybody has access. We have mobility deserts in the city. I'm really excited that we have the largest anti-displacement strategy package associated with a big transit plan that any city in the country has ever done. So I'll be talking about that a lot over the next several months, and working a lot on the homelessness issues and trying to scale up that work.
Awesome. And I'm gonna let you go back to your Friday evening.
Okay.
Mayor Adler, I really appreciate you joining us, and I look forward to the work we're going to be getting done here in the coming months. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
I do too. It's an honor to work with you, Tasha. Thank you.
You as well. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, you guys. So next up, my next guest, he wrote the book on Black displacement here in Austin. Well, sort of wrote the book on Black displacement here in Austin. Eric Tang is an associate professor in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department at UT. In 2014, he published Outlier, the case of Austin's declining African American population. That report raised the alarm that Austin was at one point the only fast-growing city in the US whose Black population was actually shrinking. He's here now to talk about what's happened on that front in the past 6 years. And I'm really looking forward to getting this conversation started. Eric Tang, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I cannot complain. It's been a busy week and we got a lot of cool things done. So feeling good and optimistic and ready for what's next.
Wonderful.
I have a ton of questions for you. I really appreciated having the opportunity to use your study to sort of influence some of the work that we were doing as advocates on the East Side. And, it really did help to, I think, if nothing else, it helped to center our efforts. I think so often you talk about centering the voices of the people most affected. And I think that was a really good reminder for, the people that I was working with at the time to make sure that we're listening to the people that are most affected and not assuming we know how to help folks. So I really appreciate that very much. In your opinion, is Austin's Black population still shrinking?
It's too soon to tell. We're going to have to look at the decennial census, the 2020 census, to get a clear sense of whether or not the pattern that we saw between 2000 and 2010 holds in the subsequent decade. And it's also not a good idea to speculate, because year to year you could see peaks and valleys, or what we call kind of interstitial, dips and peaks, because say over the course of 6 to 9 months during a given year, there were more people who moved out of the city limits than moved in. Then you'd say, oh wow, we're losing African Americans yet again. The next 6 to 9 months shows the reverse, and then you say, oh wow, look, it's increasing. So best to look at a 10-year period to get a sense and compare apples to apples.
That's good advice. So what would you say, in your opinion, without speculating, where we are now, what would you say is driving Austin's African American demographic patterns?
Well, the price of housing has continuously gone up.
Right.
Evictions have gone up. And when you look at those two things, you are probably looking at more displacement of African Americans who have historically been part of Austin communities or within the Austin city limits, right? So if displacement, evictions, and gentrification are still going full steam ahead, then it suggests that the families that were holding on during the early aughts, during the second decade of the 21st century, are likely being pushed outside the city limits. The other thing that we're seeing too is growth in the African American population in so-called suburbs outside the city limits, and one infers from that these are the displaced who once lived within Austin's urban core, historic East Austin, which, as we all know, is the historical district or neighborhood for African Americans. If we see growth outside of it, then, or outside the city limits, that is likely displacement from within the urban core, particularly your district.
Absolutely. And, which leads me to question, right? So essentially what you're saying is affordability. You're saying, folks that are being displaced, folks that are being gentrified out of their neighborhoods. What I hear you saying is affordability. And so frequently, my colleagues and I, we have these conversations about restoring some degree of affordability, which is, just such a difficult conversation to have, right? It's the realization that we live in a capitalist society, but also the realization that we have an obligation as a municipality, and a moral obligation, frankly, to, reconcile wrongs, which, is a lot of what we're going to be talking about this evening as we, all get to do a little roundtable. I'll ask you this one last thing. How do we set up conditions so that our existing Black population can not only sustain itself, but to thrive and to grow, in your opinion?
Well, it's a huge question, but I think I'll begin with where you left off, which is the question of how do you repair or redress past injustices. So as some of your viewers may know, the city of Austin deliberately created a segregated so-called Negro district during the early 1900s, during the Jim Crow era. And it was the city council that passed this so-called master plan, which said that all African Americans were going to be compelled to move to this area in East Austin. And once moved there, they were subjected to all the things that we know about when it comes to housing discrimination and environmental racism, redlining, the fact that all the polluting industries that Austin allowed to thrive in the city were placed adjacent to the African American and Latino neighborhoods of East Austin. So after 1964, when segregation is no longer statutory, what do we do to redress decades, if not centuries, of that racial oppression? You have to do something to repair that. You're not simply going to suggest that people are going to thrive and that they're going to achieve anything resembling equity without redressive action, without some form of reparation. But that was never part of the agenda. Now, fast forward a century later, after Jim Crow, we say, well, the market dictates. The market dictates whether or not people can live in a certain area and whether or not it's affordable. But the market didn't dictate the racism of 100 years ago. The state intervened to create a Jim Crow situation, an apartheid situation in Austin. So shouldn't the state 100 years later intervene to rectify those injustices? And yet none of our policies really talk about redress. We still think that market-driven solutions are a cure. We still believe that all of this is self-correcting. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in today.
I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the reasons we were really interested in having this conversation. I think it's aptly timed. Everything that we've been working on from a policy perspective, you keep hearing words like reimagine and reconcile and, atonement, and when you start, I think collectively we're all saying those words, and the sentiment I think resonates as well. So we keep talking about how we're on the precipice of true transformation as a republic, in which case I think it's high time we go ahead and start addressing the fact that it doesn't just go away. And that's a part of the questions I'd like to ask, as we move forward as a group, and this certainly won't be a singular conversation. It couldn't possibly be. Like you described my last question, as a big question, so there's no single answer, there's so many variables and it's truly nuanced. But we do have to, as a community, be having conversations about reconciliation and atonement. We never get right without it. It's one of those things. One of my guests later on is going to talk about their experience around this. But one of those things that comes up for me sometimes is, having to reconcile for people who are poor, who are low income families, when they hear themselves described as privileged, they don't quite understand how that's appropriate or true, but it is the fact that we can't just throw words like privilege around without really getting to the root of what we mean when we say that. So I look forward to digging into that and so much more later. Eric Tang, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to let you hide for a bit and we'll bring you out later.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you being on. All right, y'all, moving right along. I promised an intersectional conversation tonight, and our next two guests will help us push that needle. Race and gender, extraordinarily important. One of the things that I'm, constantly reminded of in my position on council is that one, I'm the only one who looks like me, and two, the 11th largest city in the nation, the capital city of Texas, has a majority female council. And my colleagues and I, we often get to have conversations about what our experiences are being in positions of leadership. And I'm really interested in digging into the conversation around that intersection. So these two front topics are, we're going to dig in, and hopefully there will be some questions and some good conversation that comes up as a result of. So to be Black is one thing, but to be Black and a woman is another. And I've had to describe that experience to folks on multiple occasions. And it's one of those things where, you just can't quite get it unless it's you and it describes you as a person. So Christen Smith is someone who knows a little bit about that. She's also an associate professor with the African and African Diaspora Studies Department at the University of Texas, as well as a Black feminist anthropologist and a social justice advocate. I'd say she's a true queen of community advocacy and a proud and powerful performer, half of the duo Riders Against the Storm. The next woman I'm introducing is the woman, the myth, the legend herself, Dada. I'm so excited to have you both on to dig into this conversation. How's everybody this evening?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. It's an important conversation, and I think it's just one of many that we're going to be having, starting now and moving forward. Like I said to Dr. Tang, I think everybody recognizing that we truly are on the precipice of transformation. I don't know that we all recognize just how difficult some of these conversations are going to have to get for us to get it right, and not just keep putting window dressing on issues, that are much older than any of us. So I'll start with I often wonder, this, and then, talking to my girlfriends, recognizing that we are not, in fact, a monolith. Our experiences are unique to us. So I'd like to know, in your opinion, and anybody can field the question, what are experiences that are unique to Black women during the summer of COVID and social reformation, with them colliding with one another this hot, hot Texas summer?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Christen, please.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. I love to hear Dada talk too, so I'll let me go first this time, just because that means you can top me in a minute. Well, I mean, I think that it's important to remember that the problems that Black women are facing right now are basically being compounded by the crisis of the pandemic. And so we know that here in Texas, Black women earned 58 cents on the dollar. And yesterday was equal pay day for Black women. And so that's good information to have, because sometimes we talk about how women are underpaid, but we don't necessarily realize that that's an intersectional underpaying. And so Black women are paid less than anybody else in the country. And here in Texas, that's not any different. And so when we recognize the fact that Black women find themselves at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to social precarity, then what we also realize is that when you have a pandemic and you have people losing their jobs and you have an absence of childcare and you have the COVID-19 disproportionately impacting the Black community, then Black women are bearing that brunt on their backs. And I think about Zora Neale Hurston, who's also one of my foremother anthropologists, who talked about Black women being the mules of the world. And so in many ways, we are the mules of the world. And this moment with the pandemic, especially here in Texas, where Black women occupy a space of extreme precarity, we are bearing the brunt. And so literally Black women are working in nursing homes, for example, taking care of precarious COVID-19 patients, not having daycares and not having childcare for their children, and also taking care of elderly and disabled parents. And I'm thinking about some of the people who I know personally who are juggling all of those things at the same time. And so when we talk about this crisis, we're talking about something that literally Black women are carrying on our backs. And I think about, with regards to all of the protests and all of the issues around police violence, and all the protests that were really energized or re-energized in the abhorrent killing of George Floyd. One of the things that we know is that Black women have been at the forefront of Black Lives Matter from the very beginning. It is a Black feminist and queer movement. And so people, I think, tend to forget that, because when we talk about it, we tend to only talk about the deaths of Black men, but we know that Black women are also affected by police killings. We think about Breonna Taylor, but we also know that Black women, the family mothers, we think about George Floyd calling out his mother's name, and that being the heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching moment of that time. That pain ran through all of us. When we watched that, Black women felt that pain in a visceral way. And so not only are we dealing with economic precarity, health precarity, because Black people are being disproportionately affected by this crisis, but we are also dealing with leading a movement and trying to get justice and survival for our children and our kindred in the midst of a pandemic. And so it's been an extreme pressure, and I think that everybody's feeling it.
That was all of that, and I appreciate your contribution there. It's like, but I read something the other day that said there's no revolution in history that Black women didn't lead, and I just think about the true impact of that, and that really leads me into my next question. Dada, I'm going to ask you. Well, I'll start by saying this. There was one of those nights where I was trying to be Superwoman and do everything for everybody that day, and it was right after the kids weren't going to school anymore. And so, in addition to my job as a policymaker, and, y'all may not know this, my husband had to move out in March. He's a firefighter, so he's exposed to COVID constantly, and I'm immunocompromised. And so he's not residing in our home. So now I'm a single parent, and now I'm a teacher, and now I'm also a policymaker and a housekeeper and all the things. And so I was just feeling the weight of the world that day, you know? And I woke up unexpectedly for really no reason, honestly. And I happened to look, you know, through my curtains and I could see the moon shining in. And so then I pick up my phone and I look at Facebook and I see Dada's beautiful face. And she had just started a Facebook Live video and she said, the moon is calling me outside right now. I don't know why. I woke up, it's calling me outside. And I'd like to say a prayer with y'all. It was I can't even tell you, I just got chills, the serendipity of that timing. It was, you know, exactly what I needed in that moment. And I think oftentimes Black women just know when you need that thing. And so, Dada, I'd like to ask you this question. I think as a Black woman or as Black women, how do we reconcile that expectation to be strong, you know, all the time, especially during one of the most challenging seasons in modern history?
That's a fully loaded conversation, right? Because for eons, even beyond slavery, here in the Americas and on the planet, Black women are the matriarchs. You know, if we want to go back through lineage and genealogy and understand the birthplace of humanity being Africa. So it's always been there for us. Many things that we have lost through the transatlantic slave trade and through our indoctrinations is that we also were taken care of to some degree. There was a space of respect and admiration and reverence for the mother. And there was a comprehension about the well that she possesses and what that does and how that allows that to feed the community, how that allows that to feed her household and her general family units. In this iteration of our reality, what we need to come back to in ourselves is that connection, that opportunity to understand ourselves on a beyond the systemic fragmented reality that we're in, where we're magnificent and we are glowing and we are not just strong, we are tender, we are genuine, we are amazing, glowing beings. And I think part of that is just around rephrasing ourselves also. And part of that is also this mandate that needs to be placed on culture and society, that before you ask of me, there needs to be reverence of me. Before you ask of me, there needs to be some reconciliation about the parts of my whole being, my body, my commitment to the community. There needs to be some consideration before there's even an ask. There needs to be some awareness of the wellspring that you are before there's even an ask from someone. And that, because of the way that we're structured now, because there's this totem pole, and you know, as Dr. Smith so eloquently put, that there's a totem pole and the pressure of all the things on top comes onto us, and still we superwoman ourselves because we are so amazing, because we have this power, but because we're not being fed back. It's not being fed back into us. We get depleted and we get malnourished in so many different arenas. What's really pivotal for me is what I do is hold space for as many women as possible, but definitely for women of color and for Black women to be a conduit that feeds back into that spring, that feeds back into that gives offering to that reverence of that nature. And it's really difficult because you're living in a structure that is, you know, it's very political or it's very based on commerce, and connectivity is not necessarily part of that conversation. Curiosity is not necessarily a part of that conversation. And curiosity about each other is very, very important. That's why I'm happy to see the allyship portion that's going to be coming up in this evening's program. But that also requires not just intersectionally across races, etc., but within each other's community, that we wake ourselves back up to remembering how much we actually do have access to, and we restructure ourselves back to reverence. If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, right? So we have to reestablish that back into the fold, reestablish that back into our conversations about the reverence, not just like applaud, but like really allowing our cellular persons, our cellular body to remember what it feels like to be honed in by someone who is just springing life on so many different levels to the community and feeding so many people.
Thank you so much for that. The words are beautiful. The sentiment is beautiful. And I think it really leads me into this one last question that I think I'll ask Dr. Smith. What are 3 things, if you had to name 3 things that the world needs to know about being a Black woman or about Black women, what would those things be?
That's a really important and difficult question, right? Because I think that there are so many aspects of our lives that the world doesn't know. I think that the first thing that people need to know about Black women is that we get tired. I think that is part of the work that Dada does. The beautiful work that the Dada does is kind of replenishing the fountains of where we get our energy. But I think that people are so used to relying on us to solve their problems that they forget that we're human and that we need rest and we need to breathe and we need to slow down. And I think that is something that I would love for people to be able to recognize. I think the other thing that I would love for people to be able to recognize is that we have a legacy of innovation and of brilliance that has been appropriated and erased. I run a project called Cite Black Women. And one of the things that we do is try to draw attention to the fact that Black women's ideas and Black women's contributions and Black women's work have been appropriated for many, many years. And so you think about the movie Hidden Figures, and you think about all the years you learned about going to the moon and never knew that it was a Black woman's calculations that was behind all of that. And I think that would be one thing that we also need to understand. And I think that the third thing that we need to understand, or that people would need to understand, especially people who are not Black women, is that yes, we are strong, but we also feel pain and we also hurt, and we love our families and we love them hard and we take care of people hard, but we also hurt and we feel pain. And I think people don't always remember that. I look at the ways that the sisters and the niece of George Floyd were getting up, and the sister Breonna Taylor and the mother of Breonna Taylor and her aunts and George Floyd's aunts, and George Floyd's niece and George Floyd's female relatives getting up there and talking about their killed loved ones with such resolve. But I don't really see the same way that people are taking care of their feelings and recognizing just how deeply painful it is to live as a Black woman every single day. I think about, what you just said, Dada, when you're talking about going and live streaming and bringing people the healing energy of the moon. That's so powerful to Black women because we literally are not allowed the space to heal. We're not allowed the space to be vulnerable and to be ourselves and to just show our full selves. The world is constantly beating down on us and expecting us to be something so much more than we are. And I think that's not fair. It is also the root of much of the discrimination against us. And so when people kind of expect of us that we're some sort of superhuman, non-feeling beings and entities, then what ends up happening is that our pain becomes a spectacle, and people think that they can do pain and do harm to us over and over again, and we feel nothing, but we get tired, and we also are the energy and the source of revolution.
Absolutely. And, I think given that, it's one of those things that at some point in my 30s, I decided I was going to give myself permission to be extraordinary.
Yes.
And along with that, I also gave myself permission to rest and rejuvenate and just say no, just say no. I think I spent a lot of my 20s saying, no, I'm sorry, I would, but, and, as I progress in my journey, I just say no. Mm-hmm. And I hope that more women find themselves in a position to give themselves permission to be extraordinary and give themselves permission to just say no and leave it there. Mm-hmm. Thank y'all both for your contribution to the dialogue. I'm going to move into the next couple of guests, and I can't wait for us to have the roundtable. I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of questions come in and just kind of seeing what it is that we're able to produce on this first iteration. The time is ticking away. I'm watching it tick, tick. It's like, we don't have enough time. So my hope is that this is the first installment of many awesome opportunities for us to get together and have really candid, important conversations. So we're going to put y'all back in the studio, and we'll see you after a while. Thank you both. All right, y'all. So don't forget, the last segment of our show will feature a roundtable discussion, like I was saying to our guests just now, with all of our guests who are able to stick around. So you can be a part of that discussion. Just drop your questions into the comment section. I suspect you might have some for my next two guests who are here to talk through white allyship and our quest to reconcile racism. From the progressive advocacy group, Southern Crossroads, we have Evelyn Lynn. And we also have Greg Reese, the man who started the Rednecks for Black Lives movement. And I'm going to ask for some clarity there, because the way I read it was, Greg, you created a new take on the pride flag. And so we started the Rednecks for Black Lives movement in partnership with Southern Crossroads. But, as you tell us your stories, I want you to give me a little background on how you got here and make sure that I'm not misrepresenting that. Good to meet you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Virtually, welcome to Austin, Texas.
Thanks. Would you like me to address the founding thing that you were talking about?
That would be great, just so everybody knows. Okay. I suspect there were some folks who saw the flag and just had so many questions. And, when I told them that we were going to have y'all on, because I said, I believe, that this was inspired by way of Southern Crossroads, because I had read Beth's article, and then I found your article. I went down the rabbit hole, and then I found your article with this flag in it that you designed. And so, if you could just give the folks a little bit of background about how we got to this place.
Okay, great. Yeah. Beth Howard was a friend of mine in high school, and we stayed connected on Facebook once that came around. And I had been seeing her advocating for Black lives, and I'd been sharing some things that were, similar to her ideas. And she reached out to me, and I had really had an epiphany, sadly, at the age of 40 about the Confederate flag. And I was never really what I considered a racist, but I had the Confederate flag on the back of my car, which obviously screams racist. So I learned really late that the war in the South wasn't a war about taxes. It was a war about slavery, like everybody had been trying to tell me for darn near 40 years, but also there are plenty of people here that teach and pass down that tradition that, that was a war of aggression against the South, that it wasn't about slavery, it was about rebelling and not being treated properly and all kinds of awful BS, But anyway, my friend Beth comes to me after the killing of George Floyd made me take that magnet sticker off of my car. And she says, hey, I can help you do something. I can tell, you're ready to really actually do something about this. And I talked to her, and I talked to Mike, and he's another guy in Southern Crossroads. It's a good friend now. And I said, I'd like to make something or do something. So I first started with just Rednecks for Black Lives, Beth's slogan. I started handing those stickers out from a Cricket, and then I designed the flag. And basically, if you'll put the flag up, if you can do that, I'll explain what it is real quick. The All Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter flag in the back, that's That's a nice gaff. But anyway, the All Black Lives Matter flag in the background there is for the trans community. The Black trans community is really in crisis right now, and I wanted to put that in it to highlight that. And then you have the handshake in the front that's in the shape of a heart, which is white and Black rednecks coming together and, you know, understanding each other. And behind that, you have the bars of the Confederacy, and they're exploding because the New South is rising with the realization that we need to come together and stay together in order to move forward. And so that's pretty much the whole idea behind the flag. And the inspiration really came from wanting to start the group with Beth. Really came from George Floyd's daughter saying, "My daddy changed the world." When I heard that, I knew I had to get out there. Instead of just making a change just with myself, I wanted to help other people like me to realize and to gather the ones that already were realizing and had realized that we need to move forward together and fix this for everyone.
I really appreciate that background. It's very helpful to, you know, just kind of have people see how we got here. And so I realize that you can't stick around for the round table, which I'm saddened by. But like I said, I think this is the first installment of what will probably be several conversations. There's just no way to get it all in. But thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm curious, your take on the Charleston shooting. What was your reaction?
Well, I've always been a liberal, but also at the same time, that's hard for a lot of people, especially people in the North, to understand how you can even think about liking the Confederate flag and be a liberal. But I had no compunctions about what's right and wrong about even the statues need brought down, and if the government won't bring them down in your area, you need to keep lobbying to get that done. But the shooting in particular, I think you're talking about the one that was during a white nationalist rally. I'm not sure.
I am, right. So, you know, the national attitude against the Confederate flag really started to shift after that.
Yeah. That really, I was still stuck in my ways about it. I was still not ready to embrace that whole truth. I had a lot of the parts already, and I had a truth in my heart that everybody should be treated equally. And, you know, that one last vestige of racism that I had, I think, showing at least, you know, everybody has issues that they have to work through with this. Nobody is at the end of their journey here with coming together. Certainly, I can't claim I'm perfect or ever will be, but I am moving forward and trying my best to understand everything. But that one thing was really the last thing I had that's a big issue for that's out there, you know. I was even not just fine with getting rid of the Confederate monuments, but I thought breaking them was a good idea, even though I wouldn't advocate breaking things and stuff. You know, I understand where that comes from for sure.
Thank you. I know that I do. And I would say that there are so many folks tuning in right now who really appreciate your candor. You know, in our first exchange, I told you there was a fun fact, and that's my husband grew up in Northern Kentucky. And so a lot of my family's in Kentucky. So we got Kentucky in the house tonight because they're watching. And we've been able to, my husband is Anglo, so we've been able to, as a family, have some difficult conversations. And, you know, this last 17 years of loving somebody who's different than you has really offered us the opportunity to dig in a way that, you know, we don't get our feelings hurt, and we don't have this animosity towards one another. So we really can have conversations, you know, have people who come from two different places and different formative experiences. It's really been fantastic. And I look forward to, on a national level, just as a, you know, national community, international community, for more of us to be able to collectively be able to move in that direction of, truly seeing one another. Evelyn, so I really appreciate you joining us. Like I said, I saw that article with Beth in it. I was enthralled. I was like, just so curious about what y'all are working on and what pushed you in this direction. I'm very curious to know, what are some considerations that you believe people need to make before they take on the role of ally?
Well, first, thank you so much. Beth is our organizing director here at Southern Crossroads, and she's brilliant. And so we're super glad that the article was read and shared, far and wide, and that it really, it spoke to a longing in a lot of us and a lot of our folks that we needed a way, a culturally relevant way to be engaged in this fight for Black lives. And so, we're just really grateful that it landed and resonated with a lot of folks.
Definitely landed and resonated. And now everybody wants to know, who's Southern Crossroads? What do y'all do? And what advice do you have for us about how to engage in allyship?
Yeah. So Southern Crossroads, we're a community organization, and we primarily organize low-income people in majority white counties across the South. So we bring people together around issues of housing or jobs or healthcare, and we use that to bring folks together to share stories, to do political education and leadership development, and to change policies that will have a meaningful impact in people's lives. So that's what we primarily do. And we wrote this piece because we wanted to, we really wanted to show both people in the South and, other folks in the rest of the country that there was a vehicle that folks could get involved in to do this kind of organizing work. And so to get to your question about what considerations folks need around becoming an ally, I might be different. I think I probably am different from a lot of folks out there. It is definitely really live with a lot of white folks who are beginning to feel passionate about racial justice. So many of us believe that we need to know everything about racial justice and white supremacy and be perfect before getting involved in the work. And sadly, from my perspective, too many folks believe that's the only thing they should do. But I am an organizer, and I believe that the most effective strategy to end racist violence and topple white supremacy is in building people power that can transform racist systems and policies. And what I've seen in the organizing work that I've done for nearly 20 years is that people can be powerfully changed in the service of that work. So I encourage people to take part in workshops and to read books and to learn all they can. But I am also clear that that strategy is wholly inadequate if we actually want to end white supremacy in this country. So I'm typically if your heart calls you, get in, right? Learn along the way, but get in, do the work, and let's change the policies that are harming folks.
I appreciate that very much. And that's the best part. And I think you really sort of helped to absolve some fears when you said you don't have to be perfect. Just jump in and get through it. And, Greg touched on that too, right? We're all still fallible because we are all still human beings. You will never get it 100% perfect. It's all about your intention, right? And the ability to grow and evolve and to change, and I'd say Greg's journey is definitely a true testament to our ability to grow and evolve and change and get better. And my hope is we get kinder. Although, I was having a conversation with one of my constituents recently, and she said that as you get older, you get permission to tell the truth and be mean. And so my hope is that we work on that kindness bit too, in addition to really working with one another to understand where we're all coming from. I think a lot of times whiteness in America is considered the default, So when someone talks about working class voters, they're really talking about white working class voters. When you talk about Southerners as an identity group, are you including all Southerners in that? Or are we talking about white Southerners? And I think you, Evelyn, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the question about Southerners, absolutely, yes. We include all folks. and in Southern, for all folks who live in the South. I mean, you know, there are folks who have debates about Texas. There are folks who have debates about Florida. You know, when I lived in Louisiana, people didn't think I was from the South because I lived in North Carolina and it had North in the name. So those questions aside, I mean, in terms of like race and background, absolutely yes. And I think, you know, I also think the same can be said about the word rural. Like, it's also been used as a proxy for whiteness, and it's not accurate. So these are, you know, pieces that we try to push against when we're doing our work. One thing that I would really love to complicate even more is that pundits have used the term uneducated white voters as a proxy for working class white voters. And as somebody who is the first to go to college in my family and, you know, grew up poor, just want to say it's both a little bit insulting, but it's also inaccurate. So when you get in the weeds of the data from 2016, what you find is that white people who did not go to college, but who are doing well financially, voted for Trump. White people with college degrees who are also poor voted for Clinton. And white people who are both poor and did not go to college, by and large, sat the last one out. So in Southern Crossroads, like, we're not trying to organize white supremacists. We're not trying to organize hardcore Trump voters, although we are trying to peel off his base. But we're really trying to engage the folks who sat the last one out, because we know that all poor and working class people have the most to gain from a progressive vision that centers racial and economic justice. And we're just trying to create avenues and campaigns for them to come into that work. If that helps.
That's a great answer. And I know exactly what you're talking about. In a lot of ways, I decided to run for office. I was in my car and I was listening to this NPR story, and they kept saying low information voter quotient. And it felt funny. I was like, and my mom used to say, you know, baby girl, if somebody says something and it makes you feel away, it's probably because it's about you. And so then I thought about it and I was like, I vote, you know, but then I thought, you know, how do I vote though? Am I informed? And then I realized, as a voter, I vote for the Black person, the woman, the brown person, and then the name I recognized, in that order. And that's not a way to, in an informed way, participate, you know, in the process. And so I took it upon myself to really sort of dig into becoming as educated as I could. But then I realized, you know, it's a part-time job to learn about every candidate on the ballot and learn about what the implications are of those down ballot races and figure it all out. And, you know, it's one of those things where they count on that low information voter quotient, and they make the process difficult by design, you know, to sort of limit access and put up barriers. So I really appreciate you bringing those statistics to the conversation, because I think it's very important. So thank you for that. Greg, I think this last one is going to be for you. I've definitely had these conversations in private settings, but given the South's rather problematic history, how do you build trust with African Americans while also embracing labels like redneck or hillbilly? I think, you know, the more I read about the origins of the term redneck and recognize that, you know, like a lot of other expressions that imply working class, it became derogatory, but certainly didn't start out that way. And then, you know, with my experience with my husband's family, and then, you know, like the ones that are in West Virginia and in Virginia, you know, like words like hillbilly don't mean the same as they do for other folks. And so I just wonder, you know, how do you reconcile that? And is there anything that you think people should know about the terminology, those expressions?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say that Appalachian people and Southerners, a lot of people, first of all, especially with the Southern thing, they think white. Just tipping on your last question there, but really moving forward and thinking about rednecks, and not just Southerners and not just Appalachians. Rednecks aren't just white either, because a real redneck is exactly what you've been touching on there with Beth's article. A real redneck is somebody who is pro everyone, pro fairness. And there were black rednecks in the strikes, in the mines back when that happened. So that's one big reason why we'd like to take the word redneck back, because we want to show that we're inclusive, and we want to be inclusive again, and we really want to make an impact. And when the Black community has come in, a lot of Black people have come in and embraced what we're doing. And I have a few mods and admins that are people of color, and especially a few that are Black that I've had some really great conversations with and gotten to know, and they've gotten to know me. And I really love my admin mod team that surrounded me and showed me so much love and educating me. They're really teaching me how to understand the things that I haven't understood, and how to help other people get to where I am and even further from where I am today. I have a note here about that I thought up before. That honestly, just sharing your story with people and listening to their story is really how you connect with anyone. So that's how you would connect, and that's how we want to connect. And just really trying to understand and have empathy, and that's one of the main keys, is to really put that shoe on of somebody else's and try to walk a mile. Uh, you can't really understand the Black struggle in America unless you're Black, and I get that, but I get what I don't get now. And I think a lot of people need to get there. And I'm not alone here in the South. I'm not alone here in Appalachia. There's plenty of people like me out there, plenty of people. In fact, I really think it's a majority in my heart. I may be wrong, but I think it is a majority. We just need to get louder. We haven't been loud enough. These Trump people, they're loud and they're annoying, and we just need to get louder than them. That's straight up the truth.
Get loud, take up space. I like that a lot. Greg Reese, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that you won't be able to join for the roundtable, but real quick, if folks wanted to reach out to you, I know that I joined the Rednecks for Black Lives Facebook group, and apparently y'all are growing real fast, because I saw a note that that you had to get new moderators and new admins just to keep up with the growth. But I think that's wonderful. I think it's a testament to what you were saying. People are ready to grow and to learn and to get better. So if folks want to tune into the conversation and be a part outside of joining the Rednecks for Black Lives Facebook group, is there another way that you would recommend that folks reach out to you, ask questions, that sort of thing?
Yeah, you can go to, there's a page just for like news personalities like thing called Greg Reese, and I can answer questions from there. And then there's one for the group called Rednecks for Black Lives also, that I can answer questions from there. And you can even email rednecksforblacklives@gmail.com. Myself and Beth both have access to that, so you can ask either one of us there. And of course, join the group. And you don't have to talk. You can just stay there and observe, or you can jump in and join the conversation. Really, we are inundated with people, but I mean, that's a great problem to have, right?
Absolutely.
This is a beautiful movement, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. And I'm thankful for you to give me another little platform here to get my message out. I'm sorry I can't stay for the roundtable. I really wish I hadn't made a scheduling error, but I appreciate you having me on very much, and I hope that we can all work together and really make change, because I feel it. I feel the change, and I think a lot of people do in America. I think that's what a lot of them are scared of, and I think that's what a lot of us are thrilled about. And I hate that we can't change every heart, but we'll get there one day. And this is definitely moving us forward. We're moving forward.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And something tells me we'll be in touch. This isn't the last time. Trust me. And so, Evelyn,
I love anytime.
Thank you. With Southern Crossroads, I'll ask you the same question as I did Greg. Is there a way that you prefer folks to reach out? Is there a way that they can get in touch with you and ask questions and interact with the organization?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you. That's our whole goal of writing the piece, is about trying to get people involved. And so they can go to our website. There's a sign up if you want to get on our list, and you can get information about like what we're up to, what campaigns we're moving. We've been doing these like virtual porch sits just to bring people together and, you know, talk about like what's happening. And we're really trying to launch organizing projects across the South. So like, let's say if there are any small town folks who might be listening in on this, or small city folks in Texas or elsewhere, if you want to start something in your community and you want somebody to help support you in bringing people together to change something, you know, reach out, sign up, and then we'll get in touch. And that's our website. You can also email me at Evelyn@fightforthesouth.org. So that's my direct email.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate you putting the call out for folks to be able to come on as ambassadors of sorts. I think that's how we do it. You know, yeah. I think Greg touched on something when he talked about people operating out of fear. And that's what it is. We have to get more people involved. That way we can combat, you know, the folks who don't want to see us come together, the folks who thrive in that space where there's chaos and animosity and, you know, these kind of not at all productive conversations. They want that. They want us to be distracted to not see what they're up to, right? And so the more we have these conversations, the more we get people to recognize that their fear can't be used against them if they see what the game is. Yep. So I thank you so much for coming on. And my hope is that you get to stick around for the roundtable. I think it's going to be great.
I'll be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. We'll see you in a bit. Thanks, Evelyn. All right, all that was great. I'm so excited about what's coming up next. So reconciling racism requires engagement. It requires involvement. As Angela Davis said, freedom is a constant struggle. When there's a struggle afoot, you want all the hands you can get. And that's about us coming together to get this right. So to talk about building that engagement and diversifying sectors badly in need of it, we have the founder of Brave Communities, Emlyn and the executive director, and the executive director of the new Philanthropist, Paulina Artieda.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so excited to have y'all on.
Great to see you on the screen.
It's Friday.
It's Friday.
Yes, it's been a long week, and I'm really excited that this is how we get to close it out, you know, because I'm already feeling inspired and, you know, activated. So I really am so glad that y'all could take some time out of your Friday evening to spend with us. So we'll just jump right in. I can't wait to get to the roundtable, so I won't belabor this too long, but I do have some questions. So I'd like to know, and anybody can field it, what is the one thing that surprises Black people about involvement with nonprofits from your perspective? I'm sorry, that surprises people about Black involvement with nonprofits.
Well, I can answer first if you want, Emlyn. Well, when it comes to nonprofit boards, I would say that a lot of nonprofit boards think that leaders of color don't want to serve on boards. We've been asked openly and that they frankly don't know where to find them. And we've even been asked to exchange a list of names from our network for a prize. So that just kind of tells you the silos that people live in, the silos on boards when it comes to understanding I guess you could just say the relationship building that needs to happen for people of color to be accepted and to, in a sense, be have a level of inclusion to be serving on board. So that's definitely something we've heard on our end through the new Philanthropist.
So you said people ask you how to find people of color to serve on boards. Is that pretty common? We got a visitor. So is that pretty common?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the main requests we have at the New Philanthropist from nonprofits. It's not necessarily always how do we work on our DEI goals? How do we understand diversity and inclusion and equity? It's more like, well, we have an open spot and we know you have a database, a network. Can you suggest who we can bring on, or how do we just kind of connect with those people easily? And so that's when we know we have to take a step back and let them understand that this is a journey you have to embark on. That if I would ever agree to, which I would never, to give you a list of names, you would probably be in the same state in a couple of years. diversity as an optic doesn't work, right? There has to be a very much internal shift, a cultural shift is what we prefer to say on that board for there to be a thriving environment around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. So maybe that's a good opportunity for you to tell folks a little bit about what the New Philanthropist does.
Absolutely. So the New Philanthropist is an organization here in Austin who helps Austin nonprofit boards become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And we do that in two different ways. One, we work with leaders of color to give access and opportunity, and in other words, build a leadership pipeline to serve on boards. And we also do a lot of training around that because we understand that it can be a very isolating experience when you walk into a room, or especially leadership circles, and you're the only one, right? So there's training around that to build confidence and empowerment behind board leadership. And then on the opposite side, we also help nonprofit boards embark on their DEI journey. We know that there's a lot of work to do. So in a sense, we help them find that baseline of where they're at when it comes to board diversity. And we, move in a direction to where we're a resource to them and help them set their DEI goals, help really understand what it means to have those values be a part of your culture, a part of your DNA, and then how to consistently make that a part of your journey.
I appreciate that. I think the consistency is key, right? Because like you said, you can remedy the issue temporarily just for the purposes of optics, but if you're not really trying to shift culture, it's not sustainable. So thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. Emlyn, I am so happy to see you here, and I love having the opportunity for more folks to know about Brave Communities and what it is that y'all get into. You mind sharing a bit about the work that you do with Brave Communities?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So Brave is a local nonprofit. We recently got 501c3 status. And so it's an acronym for Building Relationships, Awareness, Voices, and Engagement. And it really is an opportunity for us to come together as a community to do just that, just build a relationship. So we host monthly community conversations that we are intentional about amplifying the voices of people that have traditionally and historically been marginalized so that we can change the narrative. And we talk about social and racial justice issues. And then we also facilitate and organize youth leadership programs. So we do that for other organizations, and we facilitate U.S. Department of State programs. So when they come to Austin, these international young leaders can learn more about Austin. And we also are trying to create that here in our own Austin community. So we just, earlier today, we had a 2.5-hour session for Brave Makers, and it was a group of young women that are between the ages of 14 and 21 that come together for 3 months. And we've been working on amplifying their voices and for them to be influencers in the civic engagement for the census and elections coming up. So we just wrapped that up. We'll have another one this fall. But that was what was so beautiful, is just to see the next generation kind of passing on the baton and empowering these young women who just have an opportunity for them to share their voices and teach them more about civic engagement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anything in particular that y'all are working on right now that you'd like to share with folks?
Yeah, I mean, if you know young women that are coming to, that want to join this, we have the Brave Makers program for the fall. And so there's an application that we just opened up. So you can follow us on our Instagram and our Facebook, which is at Brave Communities. And so we are recruiting the next fall applicants. There is a program fee. It's $150, but it's completely that is not our purpose. We offer scholarships. We have sliding scale, but it's really an opportunity for young women. And because it's virtual, we actually open it up around the states. So this past summer cohort, we had 10 cities represented, but a lot of them are Central Texas. So that's nice. And then we are going to do a deeper series in this fall where we're going to continue our free Brave community conversations, but we're going to have a fall series called Be Brave, Speak Up. And it's going to be more intimate groups so that we can actually have dialogue, not only just for the panelists and the community experts, but then also within the community members. So that I think, a lot of times people don't know what to say or how to talk about race and about social and racial justice issues. So this is an opportunity for us all to kind of learn and grow together and practice our conversation skills. So we'll be launching that again this fall.
I appreciate that very much. And so this could be for either of you, which I just want to talk about diversity in spaces, right? I think one thing that we have yet to really touch on yet, I think we're all making the assumption that we all know why diversity is important, that we all know why diversity of thought and lived experience and background is important, but I don't know that that's the case. I wonder if either of you wants to speak to why it's important to have diverse spaces, why it's important to, like Paulina, I think you already talked about boards, that being, that representation is very important. I got to tell you, when I look at an organization, especially one that's doing fundraising or, really trying to get the word out, the first thing I do is I go look at their board. And if they have a board that doesn't reflect the values that they purport, if they have a board that doesn't reflect the population of people that they serve, I'm certainly less inclined to support that organization. So I wonder if either one of you wants to talk about why you think, diversity is important. Why I personally think it's paramount, but speak to your own sort of thought around that.
Sure. Well, for sure in the nonprofit space, like you've mentioned, when we look at statistics and the numbers across the USA, and this was a report by Board Source in 2017, that 84% of nonprofit boards are primarily Caucasian. And then when you look at the contrast of, I think the Casey Foundation came out with 60% of nonprofits serve communities of color, then you see a diversity gap there. And what that really means is that we don't have the representation at that table, at that governance, to make very crucial decisions for these communities of color that are being served by their nonprofits. So that means that when budgets get cut, when programming needs to be, in a sense, redesigned, all of those factors are not being evaluated, looked at by a person who is coming from that community and really understands the insides, the lived experience, the barriers, and then in some cases, some targets or some audiences or some communities may be completely missed by that nonprofit because there's no one at that board table saying, hey, we should do more for this community. We're not really reaching them correctly. There's a trust factor here. So I think to us in particular, at the Philanthropist, diversity is powerful, inclusion is powerful, equity is powerful, because for some, communities, it's crucial. It's very crucial to be able to navigate within their own systems with the help and the resources they need, and that representation matters.
Absolutely. And just, Emlyn, I'd like to get your perspective on that too, but Paulina, real fast, I attended one of y'all's events one time, and that room, first of all, the food was really good, but that room was packed. So it would stand to reason that a lot of folks are checking out what y'all are up to. And it was a room packed full of both people who were looking for folks to be on their boards, but it was also people looking for opportunities to be of service. And so if somebody was interested, either from the perspective of, really digging into the culture shift that is a diverse board, or somebody's interested in serving on a board but would like that guidance, how would they contact the New Philanthropist? What's the best way?
Sure. Well, they can definitely visit us at www.tmpaustin.org. There's plenty of information there, and there's even across most of the pages is a couple buttons. If you want to serve on a board, you'd go in one direction, and then if you are looking for board members, you'd go in another direction. But most importantly, I think that my message would be to the Black community or Black professionals is that you're valued, your presence is needed, and we know that it can be an isolating experience. So a lot of our programming focuses around that, focuses around how to build you as a leader that will sit on a nonprofit board and be able to have those hard conversations around race, around unconscious bias, around microaggressions or tokenism, because the last thing we want is for you to be discouraged to serve on a board, especially when it's very crucial for you to have you there, to have communities be represented by you there.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you said that, because, I think one of the components of the conversation that sometimes get lost is the assumption that only Black people can speak for Black people, and that sort of really leads into that allyship part, Latinx folks can speak for Black folks about the importance of recognizing some of those things that you just mentioned, and vice versa. Black folks can speak up for Latinx folks. Black folks can speak up for the Asian community, and vice versa. And so I think that's a really good way to sort of lead in, Emlyn, with you. The same question about the importance of diversity, but also that anything that you'd like to contribute to the conversation around that intersection between people of color, communities of color, you know, and how, you know, we absolutely don't have to segregate ourselves. We can absolutely work together with one another, you know, and, you know, with these intersections, these really important intersections around us all growing and thriving.
Absolutely. Well, I'll bring it more to like a spiritual side of things, you know, so I feel like, I mean, why diversity is important is because we were all created uniquely, and we've been all created, you know, with such beautiful gifts and different, you know, features. And so if we aren't able to celebrate each other's differences, then, you know, we really aren't celebrating life. And so for me personally, I feel like that is what drives me to, you know, try to build community, try to do brave communities, try to be involved as possibly as I can with people that don't look like me, don't think like me, don't pray like me, don't, you know, eat the same foods as like me, because it allows me to broaden my experience. And so I think that's just glorifies my life, because I feel like it just adds to more excitement. And so I feel like if you're an organization, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit company, I mean, that's the beauty of your product or your service, is that you're being able to reach out to as many consumers, you know, as many community members, as many customers, as well as your own employees, you know, in your own organization. So the more that we are able to embrace each other's like similarities and differences, the more and more we can build community and build a stronger, you know, whatever your network is, a stronger family, a stronger community, a stronger organization, a stronger, you know, city. So that's my why of why I feel like we should be embracing diversity.
Absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree. And thank you for bringing it to that spiritual level. I used to go to the Unity Church of the Hills, and they would talk often about seeing the divinity in one another. And I think what they're saying there is, you know, we're all created the same, and we all have this brilliant light, even though we are unique and our experiences are different. Fundamentally, we're all the same, you know. So I really appreciate you bringing it there for us to take it over to the round table now. The same question for you. If folks want to follow up with you and learn more about Brave Communities and what it is that y'all do, or just ask you some questions, what's the best way for them to make contact?
Yeah, thank you for that. So feel free to reach out to us. It's bravecommunities.org. You can email me. It's elee@bravecommunities.org. Our social media handle is @Brave Communities for Instagram and Facebook, and then Brave_ATX on Twitter. Really, you know, we have pretty regular community conversations. If you go on our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter, so you'll see the monthly conversations. We are our Brave Fest was postponed. This is an annual festival that we put on together that was usually in April, that kind of honors when MLK was assassinated, and just to like remind ourselves as a community that we still have work to do, but that was postponed. So we are going to be doing it most likely virtually, but we'll plan that, and we're probably going to plan it to fit in with the elections and also census, to try to encourage people we can celebrate with music and arts, but then also to remind people to be civically engaged. So if you want to volunteer, help us out with that. It's would love anyone's help and support with that. So feel free to reach out to us on our website, or you can email me at elee@bravecommunities.org.
Thank you so much for that. And I was saying it's perfect timing for folks to get civically engaged. This November is very, very important. So leading into that, you know, just empowering as many people as possible, and reminding folks, you know, this is a hard fought right that we all have. So I really appreciate that. I think I went to one of those festivals and I danced.
Yeah, I knew the first one, and at Spider House.
It was awesome. Thank you. Well, so we're going to move over into the roundtable section of the show. So thank you both for your contribution on this part, but don't go too far. If you're able to stick around, I invite you to, because the next segment and the grand finale is going to be us bringing all of our guests who are able to stick around back for the roundtable discussion. So I know that we lost a couple of folks, so I'm going to give everybody a chance to get in. Let's see who all we have. Let's see. Ooh, and I think we have some really good questions lining up. So it looks like we have Emlyn, Paulina, Evelyn, Dada. All right, fantastic. So let's get into it. I think, Caleb, what I'm thinking is if we could just start kind of going through some of the questions. I know we have lots of questions in the comment section, but then we also have some statements in the comment section. And there's one that I actually already saw, and I think it's really interesting. And okay. And this one is more of a statement than it is a question, but I do think it's a really important one. And Paulina, I think this will probably be mostly for you, but anybody else who has said, oh, there you are. Hi, Dr. Smith. And so it was, the person who asked the question is Rakhi. I'm not going to attempt it. Hi, there's your picture.
That's Rocky.
So Rocky says, you have to take the white supremacy out of the nonprofit industrial complex. You can't just put BIPOC, and for folks who don't know, I'm sorry, can I have a popsicle? Yes, have a popsicle. And so you can't just put the BIPOC in it. And so, so the Black, Indigenous people of color that are being introduced to the nonprofit complex, I think what Rocky's saying is, how do we remedy the supremacy that's inherent to the system before we bring people in?
Absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. There's an institutional racism that has just been a part of the nonprofit sector all along, right? So one of the things that needs to be looked at and, that we work with in terms of program is really looking at the processes, the bylaws. We ask the board, who's thriving here? Who has the most access? Who's got authority? And that itself is going to give you a very clear picture of what that nonprofit looks like when it comes to this dominant culture, when it comes to white supremacy. So it's very important to not only just work within the board and the individuals there, but also we need to take a look at what structures, what processes have been put in place to make this, I would just say just a culture that does not, that keeps people of color, that keeps BIPOC from entering and feeling comfortable and staying around. So that has a lot to do with understanding that cultural shift and being open to it, because that's also going to include a lot of the policies and the structure behind that. And then we also just feel that it's going to be a ripple effect, right? When leadership takes a huge change and does the work and the commitment around diversity, equity, inclusion, that ripple effect not only goes into the staff, but also the organization and even other leadership circles that are surrounding that nonprofit.
I appreciate that. I think in a lot of ways, it's like everything else. It's going to take time and it's going to take commitment on our part. Did anybody else want to speak to that one while we queue up the next question? All right, Caleb, I think we're ready. And, folks watching, feel free to throw your questions and comments in the comment section, and we'll get to as many as we can on the front end. And whatever we don't, I encourage all of our panelists to go back and take a look at the comment section and answer any questions that were directed to you, and I'll answer as many as I can as well. Looks like Lolly is asking us, what are good pragmatic ways of moving forward with progressive policies that help people, especially people of color, acknowledging we can't be or get perfect all at once? And anybody who wants to take it, I say jump in. Don't be shy. All right, I'll start. I think actually, Evelyn, I think you spoke to this earlier. Just acknowledging that we're not going to be perfect. You won't get it perfect. I think, in my mind's eye, it's equal parts pragmatism and consideration, right? Consideration around your intention. I often struggle with the feeling. It's that, so, when things really started to erupt at the beginning of the summer, I think some of my very well-meaning friends would say things like, I just feel so bad for you. This must be so hard for you. I just feel so bad, and that to say, there was definitely some lack of recognizing that this civil unrest, this lack of, equity and equally distributed civil rights and basic human dignity, that's all of our problem. That's not just my problem because my skin is Black. That's all of our problem. That's a failure by way of the institutions and the establishment of this republic that we all live in. That's all of our problem. Don't feel sorry for me. Definitely feel sorry. Feel bad, if that's what you're inclined to feel, but it's not for me. And so I would say, that intention there is definitely don't treat people as though they require your sympathy, because I don't know that that's productive or helpful. And then in terms of pragmatic ways of moving forward with progressive policies that help people, I would say get involved. If that's serving on a board or a commission, if that's writing into your local policymakers, your state level policymakers, it's getting involved from a civic perspective. Like Emlyn just said, they're going to be getting people engaged and activated. You can become a VDR. That's a volunteer deputy registrar. That means you can register people to vote. That means, for creatives like Dada, I think a lot of folks are inclined to follow the guidance and the advice and the direction of creatives and artists. I think we all have a way to get involved, but I would say the number one pragmatic way to get involved in policies that help people is get involved and be a part of helping to shape those policies.
Yeah, and I think I would like. Oh,
go ahead.
Okay. And I think I would like to also add, when we think about pragmatics, we don't necessarily think about the heart. We don't think the heart is involved in pragmatics, because your heart is going to influence your policy making. Your heart is going to influence your interactions and how you receive someone, and in being considerate. I think that that's a very important thing. If you want to see the heart as a tool, and recognize that our brains are not the only pragmatic tools that we have. Our heart spaces and our ability to access it on a very intimate level is very critical in the way that we form policy, actually, because our emotions do move the needle as much as we want to denounce that as being a part of how things get done. So for me, one of my main requests, I had the opportunity to speak yesterday on someone else's page, is to really sit with the tension that people feel when they have to interface with certain uncomfortable racial issues. And that goes across the board, but particularly people who identify as white. If there is a particular tension, if there is a particular guilt, it's not necessarily about expelling that onto a person of color, but there's a responsibility that has to be requested in yourself, where you will sit down and you will ask yourself, why is that there? Like any other emotional process that you take when you're trying to heal through a process, whatever trauma that is. And the trauma of racial injustice in this country and in this hemisphere, in the world, is not just an injustice towards people of color, but that damage, that trauma is also on white identified peoples, but they are in a space where they don't have to acknowledge or deal with that. And that does inform policy, and that does inform so many things that affect society because of who gets to architect the narrative. So I really encourage, when we think about pragmatics, that we don't just think about it from an intellectual space, that we do check in on ourselves and recognize that all of us, the totality of the population, Black, white, and everyone, has been traumatized by the construct of race.
I really appreciate that. And was it Paulina or Evelyn that?
Paulina.
I think I was going to say something. Yeah, well, one thing that I've been toying around with, and I think I saw it on Instagram, was, there's a lot of nonprofit, BIPOC-led nonprofit organizations doing a lot of the heavy work when it comes to racial justice, social justice. And one thing that when it comes to fundraising and donations, I think we should really turn that around and instead of a donation, accept a reparation. In a sense, you as a white community, you should be funding for reparations, and it should probably go to all of those nonprofits that are really working hard against these issues, because that's just there's charity, but these are more like reparations. We have to rebuild from the bottom to the top. So I think that's an interesting way to kind of build a policy around that, or give in a different way with a different sentiment, right?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you introduced that to the conversation. Shifting that narrative definitely shifts the sentiment, So yeah, I appreciate that. Anybody else want to speak to that question?
I mean, I definitely have, if I can throw in, one of the things that I think folks can do is to check out the Movement for Black Lives policy platform. Because they have laid out a vision. And the truth is that vision and the policies that they have identified will benefit everyone in this country. And I think part of the trick that we've been struggling with, as white folks who are trying to bring more white folks, especially poor and working class white folks, into this movement, is to help our folks understand, how does anti-Black racism directly impact me? And the truth is, it does. Dramatically different than the ways that it impacts Black folks and other folks of color. But anti-Black racism has essentially been used as the reason, as the rationale, and the stereotypes associated with it, as the rationale for why we don't have healthcare for all in this country, why we don't publicly fund and support students in public education in this country, why we don't have student loan forgiveness or free college. Like, if you literally, why we have low wages, why prisons exist at all, like, it has been used as a rationale. And that has, it's impacted poor and working class white people economically and materially. And it's impacted all white people and all people generally from a spiritual and emotional standpoint. So one of the concepts that we talk about that we've actually used from a lot of work with veterans, there's this concept of moral injury that they use to talk about, like, when a vet has been overseas and has been involved in combat or has witnessed or participated in violence. And here in this country, like, there is a moral injury to all people when Black people and anyone in this country is, it like lives in this kind of violent society, and it trickles into our communities too. And so I think we're really trying to help white folks realize our mutual interest in the ways that that anti-Black racism and white supremacy impact us all. So that's one of the things I would say is check out that policy platform, find organizations in your community who are working on some of those issues, get involved, and then, continue to read and learn and do all you can to figure out how to show up beautifully, powerfully, authentically in those spaces.
This kid.
Doing the same. So.
That authenticity. Oh, you have one too. That authenticity is really an important part of that conversation. Here's a really good question, and I've actually gotten this a lot in the last month or so, and it's one that's difficult for me to respond to. And I appreciated that Greg brought up that that space about how it's difficult to be perfect in your evolution. So sometimes when folks ask me this question, the response I want to give is because all I know is being Black. I don't know what it is to be Asian or to be Latinx. So I can only speak to my experience. It certainly doesn't necessarily, it's not me intentionally discounting the relevance of anybody else's experience, but I can only speak to my own. So this question is, and a very Black versus white world model. Where does that leave non-Black POC? In what ways can we address anti-Blackness within our own communities while also honoring our own lived experiences with white supremacist structures and systems?
Can I take a stab at that?
Please do.
Because I think this is something I think about a lot, primarily because one of the things that I do in my work and my research is work with Afro-Latin communities, Afro-Latin American communities, Black Latin American communities. And so it comes up a lot, the kinds of racism and anti-Black racism in particular that happen within non-white communities. And I think particularly the Latinx community is one that this conversation is very much happening. I think part of the problem that we really need to address from the outset is we really need to recognize that every community has a specific experience with white supremacy that needs to be addressed. And we cannot reduce those experiences and gloss over them and act as if all people of color are a monolith. And so it does me as a Black woman a disservice to pretend that whenever we're addressing anti-Black racism, we should just take the word anti-Black racism out and just say, well, let's just talk about racism against people of color, because that eliminates the conversation around the specificities of the experience, the Black experience that really must be addressed. In the same ways that it does us a disservice if we don't recognize that when we're talking about some of the racism and the vitriol and the white supremacy that surrounds conversations around documentation status and migration and immigration in this country aren't directed at the Latino community. If we don't recognize that many times that's an anti-Latino racism, an anti-Latino white supremacy, then we miss some of the specificities and the genealogies and the ways that deals with kind of an anti-Indigenous rhetoric as well, right? If we don't deal with the anti-indigeneity that's in some of these rhetorics around, changing the names of sports teams, then we miss things. And so I think that part of what we have to do is really start to take the care to do the history and do the work that we need to do in order to recognize what the genealogies of white supremacy are, how it manifests itself, how it morphs itself and changes itself in order to attack certain people. And when it's time to be in solidarity, we need to be in solidarity with the communities that are being harmed and have the wherewithal to take a step back and recognize right now we're going to talk about this community and the issues that this community faces. And we're not going to try to do the crabs in the barrel thing where we all kind of are fighting for the same resources or fighting for the same attention and trying to draw attention from away from other causes or other people or other communities in order to put the attention back on ourselves. I know that we're talking about nonprofits and I saw in the chat and in the comments, somebody talked about how BIPOC nonprofits don't get as much funding as other nonprofits get. Part of what's really insidious about how white supremacy works is that, by giving us a small fraction of the resources, it creates competition between communities that really have different needs and address different issues. And so I think that paying attention to specificity and really honoring each other's history is the first place to address that question.
I really appreciate that very much. I was a part of a dialogue the other day where the person hosting the dialogue started it by sort of laying the groundwork and said, we are not here for Oppression Olympics today. Everybody understand? And I was just like, ooh, overstand. So, yeah. Anybody else want to speak to that question?
Yeah, can I? I think it's like right now, especially, with the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening, which is needed in our nation and globally. And it's always like a black and white story and narrative. And I feel like a lot of times, like as an Asian female, it's often like, well, where do we stand? How do we share our story while we're supporting the Black Lives Matter movement? So thank you for that question, whoever asked that. And so, I think one of it is really kind of what Dr. Smith was saying, is like kind of unpacking, my own history. And because, I think census says I'm first generation, sociologists say I'm second generation. We don't know that much. At least I don't know that much from my history of American history, Asian American history. It's not taught in our textbooks. It was not, when I grew up, I had 3 major networks for media. So there was only so much information that was like whitewashed that was shared to us. And to be able to get that information from my parents, who were assimilating with broken English, like trying to raise a family, they didn't know much about American history either. So it's really behooves us as individuals just to kind of learn on our own. And now with like so much resource, like Netflix, or podcasts, or Google, or these conversations, I think they're so important. And really it's about the relationship. So get to know other people and hear their stories and their experiences. And that's how we can unpack and unlearn and then relearn and re-educate. And so right now, I know it's a very, with the anti-Asian sentiment increasing because of the coronavirus and, our leaders not calling it the Chinese virus, I'm actually going to be working with the Asian Chamber and, kind of unpacking and talking about some of these things that, especially for business people, when you're thinking about like, capitalism, and you're thinking about like, how do I like keep my bottom line afloat? One of the things that I know for Americans, for Asians American, is that, during Reagan era, he kind of defined us as this model minority, which is totally, a way to like pit the communities of color against each other. And so we have to kind of unpack that of like, well, how we've now been normalized into this, model minority, and meritocracy is so important as immigrants. So how do we, I think I was telling my best friend this, and she's like, that was a really good quote. So I'm going to have to try to remember it. But it was, meritocracy is, I believe, like the crutch of Asians' support for anti-Blackness, and so it's like, we have this mentality of like, okay, we got to do well because, we came to America for education, for working to live this American dream. If we've been here, just for a generation or 2 generations, like, why can't others do it? And it's like, we don't know the history behind the Black American history. And, so it's, how do we don't know the history behind Americans. And so if we can understand how and the Black community has like provided so much opportunity for all communities of color, then we can work in solidarity in a better and stronger way, and just to be able to be a more, a collective voice.
Really quickly, I added something to the chat because I think it might be helpful. Because when you were talking about the histories and not knowing your history, there's a wonderful site that emerges out of the legacy of Howard Zinn, which is called the Zinn Education Project. And it really does a great job of telling the history of all people of color in this country. And I really want to just put a plug in them for them. They have things for teachers and things, pedagogical tools, and they're really, really good about doing exactly what you were just talking about. So I wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I'd really appreciate any other resources, that this, really awesome panel might have for folks to dig into on their own time. Feel free to go back to the live video and just throw it in the comments. Oftentimes people will come later and watch the video later. And so the comments go in the archive with the video. So folks can keep following along and finding resources there, which is really, it's been very helpful. And unless anybody else wanted to speak to that one, I have another question that I'm going to move to. Okay, so I lost it. I'm sorry. So Darwin asked, research reflects that nonprofits led by BIPOC don't receive the same level of funding from philanthropic foundations and donors versus white-led orgs. What are some strategies or conversations you're having to change that dynamic?
Well, I can speak on that a little bit. I know one thing that we're more active with foundations is to kind of bring this analysis of diversity, equity, inclusion into their grants. So when they're asking for grantees for their applications, asking them on their makeup of their board in terms of demographics and race and ethnicity should be a priority for foundations or any sponsors to give out money, because that itself is a great measurement, a great way to, one, incentivize nonprofits to do the work to become diverse, right? But then also to, make room for BIPOC-led organizations that will most likely have boards that are diverse. And so that's something that we've been having in talks with a lot of the foundations, and we want to make more of a strategic approach and having that accountability when it comes to applying for any type of money or grants.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know how it happened, but we got 5 minutes till this show is over. I think, we're just going to have to do it again and again and again. I'd like very much for everybody to leave us with any final thoughts you have, or any events, initiatives, anything that's happening that people should know about. We'll go around in a second. Okay. Well, yes, please jump in.
Okay. Yes. So again, my name is Dada. I'm one half of Writers Against the Storm. We are curators here in Austin and producers, and also civically engaged. We do a lot of work in the community, a lot of social good programs and efforts. Please be sure to go ahead and check out a lot of what we do. You can go to rashiphop.com to see a lot of that. Just always be on the lookout. And my final remark, my wheelhouse is not necessarily in the political space. My wheelhouse is not in the intellectual academic space or in the building of infrastructures of nonprofits and other things. My space is to be a truth teller, to ensure that there is a legitimate pipeline from the heart to the structures that are being created and dismantled. That if there aren't any real honest conversations being had within yourself about these structures and how one benefits or how one is oppressed by them, then the authenticity of that playing out is a jeopardy. And so for me, my final remark is to please check in on the truth of how you're feeling about all of these things and process it like any other thing that needs to be reformed.
Thank you very much.
I can go next. Well, with the New Philanthropist, we're definitely have programming and workshops. We have 2 workshops left for our Equity Chair workshop, where anyone who wants to lead with a cultural conscious perspective, please visit our site and register. And then, Natasha, honestly, I want to thank you for bringing us all together. This is one thing that we have seen with the New Philanthropist that is needed, that we've even been asked by a lot of our mentees or leaders of color, like, we want to have more discussion, we want to have more engagement. And I think that's what's transformative about this work, is that the more we can talk, the more we can share our ideas, our perspectives, our barriers, is the more that we're going to be able to grow and really make change happen and transform. So creating those safe spaces is very important to us as an organization. Safe spaces where people of color can thrive, safe spaces where allies can also become a part of that conversation. And absolutely, it's just going against that culture of assimilation. We're trying to create a culture where you can come in and just show up as your authentic self.
Thank you very much.
Did somebody else want to go? I can't ever see who's next. I'm sorry. Did I talk over someone? Okay. I just wanted to say thank you so much for including me in this conversation. As an academic, I realize that we talk too much. And so I'm always trying to take a step back and particularly making sure that people from the community get the space and time and voice that they need to be able to be heard. As a new director for the Center for Women's and Gender Studies at UT, I really invite you all to join in our fall programming and our spring programming. We really want to partner with community as much as possible. And so we hope that you're able to support us. And I also just want to make sure that I mention the work that I do with Cite Black Women, the Cite Black Women Collective. We have a whole project around lifting up Black women's voices and intellectual contributions. And we have a podcast and lots of good and interesting work celebrating Black women. And so I really encourage you to take a look, and thank you again.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And I think there are some comments about specifically about intersectionality and gender and, that space where oftentimes the voices of BIPOC and BIPOC trans folks sort of get drowned out and movements get co-opted. And I think oftentimes that's by well-meaning folks. And then sometimes it's by folks who honestly need to have more conversations with the people who they purport to advocate for. So I welcome Dr. Smith and anybody else who'd like to field some of those questions from Rocky in the comment section. I'll jump in here real quick if y'all don't mind. There's a question from Brenda Fierro, and this is, I mean, that the civic engagement part, especially recognizing just how difficult it is to be highly informed. She says, yeah, like, what does the railroad commissioner do? So I'm going to tell you a funny story real quick. I was hosting this voter information clinic. We set up this booth and it was like, okay, you show your ID here and then you go to this next table. It was a simulation. Like, what do you do? Because I was polling people in the neighborhood and a lot of them said they didn't vote because they didn't know how, because they were embarrassed. They didn't know what was on the ballot and how to go through it. So we were doing these clinics to walk people through what do you do when you get there. And we had these, what they call voter mentors. We had some volunteers that were coming and, walking people through it. And, having somebody say, well, I'll be damned, and asking the question, is everything okay? And the response was, it was about the Railroad Commission. It said, did you know that Railroad Commissioner don't have nothing to do with trains? I was like, actually, I only just learned that myself. I do know. Do you know? And then, we continue the conversation, at which point I said, well, what do you think they do? And then the response was, sounds like oil and gas to me, which, was instinctively absolutely correct, right? And so I think oftentimes we disregard the importance of our instincts, but also being open to learning these things that, there are folks who'll tell you you're supposed to know. And so then you don't want to ask. You're ashamed to ask these questions. Never be ashamed to ask these questions. They don't want you to ask. The ubiquitous they want you to be ill-informed and underinformed. They don't want you to participate. They want you to be too ashamed to ask. They want you to feel small for needing to ask questions. And that none of that is real. It's all made up and they're gaslighting you. So I really just want to encourage everybody who's inclined to ask some questions, to get involved. I'm certainly always willing to be open for those questions, but the League of Women Voters, they produced what they call a guide. And so this guide, it's a pamphlet. It's like a small newspaper. And you can go through and it really does help walk you through the various items on the ballot and the implications of that position and how it could affect you. There's also a resource called Vote 411. Vote 411, you can go in and you can create a sample ballot for yourself. You put in your address and then it'll create this sample ballot for you, at which point it'll show you which names would be on the ballot where you would vote. And you can go line by line by line on this sample ballot and it'll pop up the candidates running for that particular office. Then you can click on that candidate and it will show you their key issue positions for people in like judge positions, for example, or prosecutors. It'll tell you kind of, what their history has been. And that's so important as we're having these conversations about criminal justice reform. We have to take into consideration the cops are just one part of that. We have to talk about the defense. We have to talk about the prosecution, and we got to talk about that judge. That's of the utmost importance. And so I encourage folks to tap into those resources: Legal Women Voters Guide and Vote 411. And my office is always open. We're District 1. That's District, the number 1, at austintexas.gov for any questions you have. And if we aren't the ones to answer them, I will send you in the right direction so that somebody answers your question. I thoroughly encourage everybody to get involved. November is so important. I think we were saying this back in 2016, right? And if we didn't learn anything in this 4 years, November is going to be very important to what our communities look like moving forward. And so anybody who's interested in getting involved, who wants to help me, there's a couple of initiatives I'm interested in getting started. Anybody who wants to jump on board, please reach out. District 1, number 1 at austintexas.gov. We got 2 minutes. Anybody want to close this out? All right, folks, I appreciate your time. Emlyn Lee with Growth Communities, with New Philanthropist, Christen Smith, University of Texas, Evelyn, Lynn, Southern Crossroads, and Dada, of all the magnificent, beautiful, wonderful things. Thank you for reminding us to think with our hearts and not always with our heads, because I think that's a really important reminder for all of us. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Thank you. Wow. So I predicted that would be.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
We're off.
I predicted that would be the first in a series, and my prediction was right. They aren't always right, but that one was definitely right. We're going to have to keep doing that and keep those conversations going. I got to tell you, the year 2020 is definitely going to be a big one for our future historians. Hardly any part of this year has felt remotely normal. I know we keep asking ourselves about the new normal and getting back to normal. There's no getting back to normal. It's all new from here. It's all hopefully evolved and changed for the better from here. Right now, though, we're all struggling with the pandemic and the economic clamps it's put on so many of us. There's justifiable reason for despair and, confusion. I mean, there's just so much uncertainty. The appalling deaths of people like George Floyd and Mike Ramos and Breonna Taylor have created justifiable reason for outrage. My hope is that outrage, I hope it resonates with all people, not just some people. Unprecedented outrage that has produced an unprecedented uprising against the racism and white supremacy that is baked into our country's genetic code. The explicit laws upholding racism are gone, but white supremacy found a way to exist in the shadows and keep its hold on policies and on institutions. As an elected official, it's my job to help preserve those policies and I will take that back, because not to preserve, but to reverse those policies and repair those institutions. But until we all, as a city, as a state, and as a nation, finally identify and confront the fact that racism is an infection of both the heart and the mind. With COVID-19, we have to wait on the medical professionals to find a cure. But with racism, it's up to each of us to treat it when we see it. That happens with open dialogue, with collaboration, and with understanding. It's a long journey ahead of us. I'm glad to be on it side by side with each of you. We'll see you here next Friday at 5 p.m. for another edition of Talk with Tasha. In the meantime, I encourage everybody to stay safe, to stay healthy, and where you're able to, try to have some fun. Good night, everybody.